Is it anti-American to teach factual and accurate Hawaiian history? Is it in some way unpatriotic to acknowledge the role of the United States in the acquisition of Hawaii's territory? Let's talk about it. Ano ai ke aloha kako, I'm Kekua ke aloha, and this is Iola ka Lāhui, Deconstructing Colonization in Hawaii. If you're new here, I'm an advocate for Mea Hawaii and Ike Kupuna, and if this sounds like something that aligns with you, please go ahead and subscribe, follow me, do all of the things. You can find me on YouTube, I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and Blue Sky. I'll soon be on all podcasting platforms, but more to come on that eventually. So this series, being somewhat new and probably controversial, is starting off with a bang. We are going to dive right into some of the more in-your-face conflicts that I think all Hawaiians experience. I'm talking, of course, about how Hawaiians came to be under U.S. control and how that conversation goes with people who don't necessarily share our worldview and perspective. It's not like it's some big secret, right, that the United States participated in the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. People actually know this history. How willing are we to confront this history and critically examine it? The reason that I decided to start with this particular topic, Hawaiian history and the potential to appear to be anti-American, is because of a press briefing that came out of Donald Trump's White House from his Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller. And also, I'm just going to say this right now. This page, this series, this podcast, this is not a safe space for Donald Trump stands. Anyway, what Stephen Miller talks about here in this press briefing is education, critical race theory, and what the Trump philosophy, quote unquote, on education is. I'm using the word philosophy very generously here, but let's take a listen.
This administration's also fighting to get critical race theory out of our school districts. Children will be taught to love America. Children will be taught to be patriots. Children will be taught civic values for schools that want federal taxpayer funding. So as we close the Department of Education and we provide funding to states, we are going to make sure that these funds are not being used to promote communist ideology. For any nation to be successful, it cannot teach its children to hate themselves and to hate their country.
Okay, so let's break this down. First of all, I just want to say that my degree is in sociology, and I learned in depth what critical race theory is and how to apply it in the real world. Nobody is teaching elementary, intermediate, or high school students critical race theory. But for those of you who are actually curious about what critical race theory is, it's the application of a sociological lens to view particular circumstances and to critically examine them. It's based on the understanding that race is a social construct that critically assesses how race either contributes to particular social ailments or is affected by these social ailments. It's really just a framework for understanding a complex social experience. But how does that relate to us here in Hawaii? Well, using a critical lens, we can examine the ways that Kanaka Maoli have been disproportionately burdened by poor health and education, how we've been displaced, how we carry the highest burden of poverty, and tend to be the most justice involved. It's not critical race theory to point out this disparity in and of itself. But once we examine why this disparity exists, we've crossed into critical race theory kind of territory. Education is a great example. The banning of our language in schools and the widespread cessation of Hawaiian language disproportionately impacted Kanaka Maoli. This shift put our people at a disadvantage and was imposed on us by a haole government. Our people tended to be concentrated in areas that were resource deprived, which left our schools unable to meet the educational needs of our people. And we continue to face so much discrimination in just a lot of different ways. This is really just a very surface level explanation, but I think that you get the point. Are these not relevant topics in understanding how we assimilated? If I want to look at another example, I can take justice, well, rather injustice, and I can use the example of Joseph Kahahavai and the Massey trial. Joseph Kahahavai was murdered by a haole man who spent, I think, an hour in the governor's office or something like that to serve his sentence. The value of Joseph Kahahavai's life didn't matter to the haole judiciary and officers of the law. Joseph Kahahavai received no justice because he was Hawaiian and not haole himself. But should the nuance of this story never be told? Let's add some additional context. So please just stay with me for a little bit and we'll circle back to Hawaiian history, I promise. So you heard Stephen Miller mention that children will be taught to love America and that children should not be taught to hate themselves. But what does that actually mean? I would challenge anyone listening here to find a teacher, just one, anywhere in the United States who has told their students they should hate themselves. The administration knows that this just isn't actual reality. But one thing that we know is that the Trump administration much prefers a sanitized version of history. And something that they've done is that they very cleverly worded an executive order to frame education in such a way that it enables them to act on this. In the executive order entitled Ending Radical Indoctrination in K through 12 Schooling, Trump orders the creation of an ending indoctrination strategy, which is supposed to contain a plan for eliminating, among other things, what he calls discriminatory treatment and indoctrination in K through 12 schools. The executive order defines discriminatory treatment and indoctrination as teaching people they should feel guilt or anguish or other forms of psychological distress because of past atrocities. It goes on to say that students will be offered patriotic education, which is defined as an accurate, honest, unifying, inspiring, and ennobling characterization of America's founding and foundational principles. And the concept that celebration of America's greatness and history is proper. The problem with this language is that it conflicts directly with itself. Learning the history of America is tough work. The legacy of slavery and segregation are historical examples of systemic, institutionalized racism that functioned as a tool of disenfranchisement and marginalization. That is just objective truth. But this is exactly what the Trump administration is referring to when they talk about curricula that might lead to someone feeling guilt or anguish or other forms of psychological distress. In another executive order titled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, the Trump administration takes direct aim at the Smithsonian Institute for calling out the racism present in American history as if that can be omitted somehow. No reasonable person can separate the legacy of slavery and segregation from American history. And in the same vein, the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy cannot be separated from Hawaiian history, especially as it relates to how Hawaii came under US control. Now, herein lies the problem. Many Americans, namely Hawaiian Americans, experience discomfort when they learn our history and the role of the United States in the overthrow. Most Americans are already taught some sanitized version of history, and knowing that the United States sometimes got it wrong is apparently distressing. It's distressing because Americans are taught to be patriotic, that the United States is the greatest nation on earth, and that because it's the greatest nation on earth, there is no room to question its history. But that is just such an unhealthy way to look at one's relationship to country. Just like in all of our relationships, we learn to accept the flaws, the mistakes, and the blemishes. Americans look at imperialism with judgmental and critical eyes when it's the British, the Danish, the Spanish, the French, the Japanese, and the Romans. But American imperialism? Never questioned. And it's never questioned because we are expected to demonstrate our patriotism through quiet acceptance. Quiet acceptance for many Hawaiians breeds resentment. Resentment that we have not had our own history acknowledged, that our problems have never been properly addressed. And this resentment compounds on top of itself when we start to dive into the larger issues that stem from the overthrow. Issues like continued land dispossession, language loss, discrimination, and negative outcomes in so many different social indicators. Being unable to talk about these things is exactly why we often look like angry Hawaiians to visitors or non Hawaiians. Our frustrations with being pushed out of our own homeland is rooted in this history. How can we talk about exploitative land dispossession through leasehold conversion, for example, without first understanding that the United States acquired this land against the extensive protests of the Hawaiian people? When we talk about how Hawaiians make up 40% of our prison population, but only 20% of the population of Hawaii, we have to talk about risk factors like poverty and poor social mobility, poor education, poor health, all things that find their roots in our history. I'm honestly at this point, I'm so used to people telling us that we need to just work harder, that we need to just accept our history. But this isn't a problem of acceptance. We obviously accept our history and what it is. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. And it's not about working harder either. What others, namely Americans that are uncomfortable with our history, are telling us to do is to pivot to embrace a way of life that no longer serves us as kanaka maoli. And I think that this is something that a lot of folks who aren't from Hawaii can't really grasp. For some of us, fully embracing an American way of life means abandoning our roots, our kupuna, our mo'oku auhau, and our aina. If there's no room for our history, there's no room for us. So, what do you think? Is our history anti American? Is it unpatriotic to be honest about the role of the United States in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy? Or are we able to have a fuller, more robust dialogue about our future if we acknowledge history as it actually happened? How do we start that conversation? And we could come together with the understanding that our history is imperfect as long as we're working toward a solution. But if you don't see the struggle of my kupuna, then you don't see me. I hope you're all doing well. And if you're enjoying content like this, don't worry, there's going to be more to come. And if you are brand new here, check out my intro video. And don't forget to follow me on all of the platforms. I am on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky. All right. Take care, everybody. Ahui ho kako.